just want to say welcome to everybody, and I appreciate the chairs of what I will say are the two best committees on the council. I happen to be a member of both committees, but I appreciate you indulging me in having this conversation, because what had become apparent to me serving on both of these committees is organizations, good social service organizations, were asking for help. And we have a finite limited of resources, particularly with the Uber Lyft surcharge, which was really the pool of money everyone has been trying to access, and recognizing that the need is real, the need is great, and it's valid, wanting to take a step deeper and figure out how we can help everybody in a sustainable way, quite frankly. And wanting to set the baseline as to what services we already have and how we can collaborate. Because if everyone is asking for buses for senior services, well, how often are you using those buses? Might there be swaps that could be incurred between either the county or any of the other nonprofits or social safety agencies? And so the reason I requested this conversation was to set that baseline so that we could all become more educated on what resources are here. And the package shows that there are some really great resources. And I'm really thrilled to know that people are utilizing them. And as has been said, the need will only continue to grow as we have an ever-aging and increasing size of the population here in Montgomery County. And so I just wanted to share with you all the reason I asked for this conversation to be held. And while we're still on DOT, I just have a specific question regarding the call and ride program. The low income eligibility, how do you classify low income?
So we heard this in 2016 with the state's standard for Medicaid recipients. That was the first time there had been any change in the eligibilities for maybe 15, 20 years. And we considered, obviously cost of living and all of those, and recommended, and the council approved that. So that's where we heard that. It's not as we've received, requests in the last couple of years to kind of tie it to the county's own standard. Self-sufficiency standard will be more appropriate for Montgomery County residents. And I should also say that within the 4 categories that we have in call and ride that I talked about, almost 90% of our clients are within the lowest income category. And they are the frequent users of the program. And those are the people we subsidize at 91.3%. And now the next level we subsidize at 83%. They're also, frequent users, but not as frequent as the lowest income participants. And then the next level is 67%, and then the 50%. Those are rare users of the program.
And so, Samuel, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard. Do you know what those income levels are?
Yes, we do. Absolutely, yes, sure. Okay, I can.
Yeah, go ahead and read it. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
so what we have, and this we can just start with because it's based on household, the composition of the household. So if we can start with a one-person household, the lowest level would be somebody who has 0 to 15,856. Will be at the lowest level. And then the next level, which is the one we subsidize at 83%, will be incomes between 15,856 and up to $21,403. The third level, which is the 67% level, will be 21,404 and up to 26,951. And then the last level, which is the 50%, will be 26,952 and up to 32,499.
Definitely low income, right?
Yes.
Are those levels compatible to any other levels of service or social services that the county provide. And the reason I ask that question is as this population continues to grow and as county services clearly aren't going away and there's a lot more need that we all know we need to provide, if there are income levels, household income levels, individual income levels, whatever they might be, knowing what services one should be offered. And so if there's an apples to apples range across county services, I think that would be probably most helpful to our residents.
So within the county, I can't say that I know of another program that is in line income-wise with ours. Our levels, when we did the modification 2 years ago, was more paired to Medicaid standards. So that's where we kind of paired it to.
Thank you. I think should we be talking about DOT now? If you have DOT-related issues, now's the time. Can you share a little background information about seniors ride-free on WMATA? On Rida.
In WMATA,
What's
yes.
the volume? What do we know? Do you count? Are you able to count those trips, or do you wave them in without counting?
We do count them. I don't have that number offhand, but we certainly are seeing a growth in that. Just like with the Kids Ride Free, we're seeing a tremendous growth in that. And certainly
I
we've...
want to share my sixth grader came home last night and he had unannounced taken a trip into downtown Silver Springs. He said, "You can just use your student ID, Dad."
That's right.
I was like proud of him, and I was like, "You should definitely tell me before you do that."
Well, glad he used it. We like any new customers. It's a wonderful thing. So we certainly we appreciate the growth in the Senior Rides Free program, and we think it's an exciting way for people to see an opportunity to get around this county using our services.
Yeah. Well, so currently, what are the limitations on the hours for seniors ride free?
On Mondays through Fridays, we are 9 until 3:30, and then what?
9:30.
9:30 to 3.
9:30 to
Yeah,
3.
and then Saturdays 8 till 4:30.
8:30 to 4.
8:30 to
Yes.
4.
Could you
Yes.
provide us with an estimate of what it would cost for that to be 24, all operating
Yes,
hours?
yes, we certainly can do that.
I'm sure my colleagues
Understood.
as well. What is the status of the accessible vehicle fleet in the taxi arena? Accessible taxis. How many do we have in the county? Who has them?
So, okay.
Fred?
Fred, why don't you come up? You need the mic.
And what's the status of the partnership we aspire to have with New York? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
The retired fleet in New York. we're talking about.
I cannot tell you the status of the retired fleet partnership with New York, but I can tell you,
Is that on?
yes,
Thank you.
currently we have 51 accessible vehicles active in active operation.
And the taxi co-op, what's the status of the taxi co-op?
They are operating, they have drivers, yes, and they are 100% accessible.
It's inaccessible, and they're operating. Are they part of Call and Ride or any of these programs, or are they just operating on their own at this point?
They are part of these programs.
They are part of this program. Okay, well, that's good to hear. I know that they are operating, but I hear that they're sort of just always on the verge, you know. Is there any imminent decisions that we need to make related to their?
I don't know that there are any decisions needed to be made for them. They're a startup, and it's challenging, and so.
Haven't they sought the counties, just to follow up, didn't they seek the county's help accessing vehicles?
Correct.
And what's the status of that?
The vehicles that they currently have were received from a WMATA grant that actually used county funds as the offset. So, yes, the county did participate in their acquiring of those vehicles.
There hasn't been a more recent generation of that?
There has not been a more
Okay.
recent generation, correct.
Okay.
Okay. Can Call and Ride be used through any of the ride-sharing apps, or is that, how is a resident able to, can they use Call and Ride for the Lyft ride?
No. The participants in the program can call any of the participating taxi cab companies to schedule a trip. The app that we have for the clients, it's basically their client information portal where they can access their account, see the balances on their cards, see a history of their trips, and that record. But we don't have an app capability yet. Now, some of the cab companies do have apps where clients can go on and schedule trips for themselves. But we have no partnership with Uber or Lyft or any of the TNCs.
Trying to initiate a partnership with them?
Well, one of the problems we have is, those TNCs, they don't have wheelchair-accessible vehicles to serve our clients, and it's significant.
I understand that, but what share of the Call and Ride trips are wheelchair trips?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I know we have close to 1,000 recipients of our program who have some kind of disability. May not all be wheelchair bound, but some kind of disability.
But your ability to ride in a traditional sedan is sort of varied depending on the extent of your disability.
Yes.
It could be just fine for you, or it could be inaccessible to you. That's
Yes.
very much
So that's a conversation that, within the department that has to, we can have to see if that service will be
Could you please? I mean,
Yeah.
I think it would be, for those who are able to use
that aspect, yeah.
a passenger vehicle, it would enable them to have access to far more vehicles to book a trip in a much more efficient system. And I certainly was told by the TNC companies that they would be very open to exploring that, back when we were setting up the regulatory framework.
I just had a couple more questions. I appreciated the slide on the outreach, and I know you guys are out as wherever you can be. I see you guys at community meetings, but that's obviously a moving target. And with social isolation being such a huge issue, do you have a marketing budget, or is this done somewhat organically through existing staff and resources, or how does that work?
I'll say both. We have some marketing budget, but within our section we do have a program specialist whose position title is outreach specialist, and that's really all she does. In addition, our partnership with JC as well, within the contract, they do have to go out to community events as well. But yes, we do have some budget for marketing, and then a staff person who's solely dedicated to outreach on senior transportation and individuals with disabilities transportation.
And I know this is program by program, but generally, would you say you're at capacity or still have some room for being able to add additional rides if there was an increase in communication and marketing? Would you have the capacity to address?
We do have some capacity. Within, if we're saying something like maybe the free ride on, we have lots of capacity there. Within Call and Ride, we have, some attrition. Unfortunately, we lose participants because of the age of participants in the program. So on the average, monthly, we add, I want to say close to 43 recipients to the Call and Ride program each month. We do lose some, just based on either they relocate or some unfortunate incidents. They're no longer with us and things like that. But we have capacity. That's why we continue to spread the word. We don't have a wait list or anything like that. Anybody that applies and qualifies is in the program.
And then finally, I just want to echo something that Councilmember Reamer said. We are fortunate to have a very active group of seniors in our community. And so the Ride Free program, through those specific times, one of the requests we used to get all the time, Recreation probably still do, is more evening programs, specifically targeted to seniors, because you've got a lot of folks who are working these days, And so I think that that's something that would be worth exploring as well. But that's it for now on those
I have
questions.
one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Transportation Services Fund, can you please just give us an update on, it's mentioned several times in the packet, what are the limitations on that fund now? It's been an issue, a lot. It may be,
I mean,
is it being expended now?
currently, we are focusing on the accessible taxi cabs, but we've also used it in a grant for JCA as well, and we are actually using it as an offset for another grant that we are looking for. You mentioned education. We've submitted a grant for
Travel, yeah.
council's government grant for
A travel training bus.
travel training bus, to take the bus to them, actually teach people how to use the bus and everything in it, and do additional education with that.
If I can add, that's, the grant request is something the council needs to approve.
Yeah.
Just to make the request. And it's likely that if we get the money, it won't be available till the FY '22 budget.
Right.
So
What
it's,
are the limitations on the fund?
Currently, I mean, the limitations on the fund are only the limitations within Chapter 53, which are to be used for seniors, people with disability, and people with limited income, to enhance transportation options for them. Again, we have been focusing on the accessible cabs because one of the biggest complaints we get is the on-demand, door-to-door service for an accessible vehicle is very challenging. And
I
so,
think it's a great focus, but
Yeah.
I'm concerned that
To-
we're not
to-
spending the fund.
correct.
I mean, that's the problem. We don't have enough. The money's just sort of stacking up, and then it ends up getting pulled into the.
Right.
you might recall that, was it last year, or the year before, the executive, to sort of close the budget gap, used some of that money
A significant
for
portion
the,
of that,
significant amount of that money for seniors ride free.
Right.
Because it wasn't being used for, there weren't any claims on it, very few, for outfitting cabs. The new law would allow that to happen, but then it becomes a budgetary issue as to, how much do you want to go for that?
Would allow to enhance, because it's no longer supplanted as supplements. So if we,
Right.
it could be used to expand seniors ride free.
Right.
If I could, so I appreciate you asking that specific question. I mean,
Sure.
that is the heart of why I asked
Right.
for this conversation to be happening, because it seemed that those funds were being used in important ways, but without much thought about long-term use of that fund. So funding had was approved for JCA. Funding had been approved to Union Taxi Cab, I believe, for all
Multiple
of the
cabs.
Right, multiple taxi cabs, and that was earlier this year. And so the question I had was, how much funding remains in this pot, and what are our plans for it? And so now to hear that there are other ideas, which some could say are stray from that. I mean, what I'm hearing from you, the grant. Can you repeat again what you're hoping to use it for?
Hoping to use
Conditional
it for
upon council approval?
an offset for a grant application for a educational bus.
It's like our local match.
Teaches
It's like
people
a-
how to use the
Yeah.
bus.
How to use how to access the bus, where the bus pick it up, how does the lift work, things like that.
Okay. I'll end by saying there's lots of needs for these funding, and so it's my hope that one of the things that we come out of this conversation with are some more streamlined goals for that fund.
Just a couple final, real specific questions. Not all seniors obviously are familiar with app-based services or comfortable with them. If I'm a senior seeking a ride in one of the service areas, can I call somebody to get a ride on Flex?
The Flex right now is a pilot program. We're actually still studying it. We've got these two zones. The Council of Governments, to their credit, gave us a grant to study it. And we hope to have some better answers for you by the January, February timeframe, because we'll have 6 months under our belt. The good news is we're seeing ridership continue to grow in the Flex program, but it is just it's a couple buses and it's app-based. But we certainly see as there are opportunities for that program to expand, to add additional factors or features to it, so it's a little more accessible, so to speak. The buses are accessible. They're just like our standard ride-on bus, but there are things that we can actually hope to improve in the program in the upcoming year.
Great. And then real quick, have you been contacted by Mount Jezreel Church about access to the Long Branch Center?
I have not,
I can follow up with you offline.
yeah.
That was one. And then can you remind me what's your current status of your services to Riderwood?
As far as the fixed route service or?
Yeah, and any other partnerships with them. There's been a couple different proposals.
We don't have a specific, we have our standard routes in the areas where Riderwood is, but we don't have a specific program to
You haven't heard
Riderwood.
from them recently?
No.
Okay. All right, I'll follow up with you. Thanks.
Great.
I was just saying, I think that was also part of the senior transportation initiative through recreation, the Mount Jezreel.
Okay. I can wait.
Final question. I think we ought to ask the executive branch to fund full-time seniors ride-free from the Transportation Services Improvement Fund in the budget recommendation that we get this winter.
Clearly, I think that's a great idea, expanding our public transportation system. You know, we've done it for youth, and we should certainly do it for seniors. And the one point I would make about that is finding out how much that actually costs. Because when earlier this year, when I asked DOT for information on how much expanding the Kids Ride Free program was, the dollar amount was $1 million, which was unsubstantiated, I will say. No one could actually give a rationale as to why that cost $1 million. Half of it was told was going to WMATA, the other half was recouping costs at Ride-On, but there were no figures to actually determine that cost. I look forward to diving deeper into that in the next budget session, because quite frankly, I think there's money left over from that. I don't believe it cost $1 million. So, a good point, but let's make sure the dollars are basically in real numbers.
We'll certainly do that.
If I can add one caveat to both Kids Ride Free and Seniors Ride Free. One of the concerns about extending it all day was if, and it may not be a case, but if it generated so much ridership that it caused certain buses to be overcrowded, it would mean adding more buses to the fleet and wanting more drivers. So it could happen, it may not, but that's a potentiality. And as far as the costs, for Kids Ride Free, the WMATA costs are substantiated because they keep record of how many people are doing it. It's the ride-on portion of it, which is, I would say, softer. The same thing will be true with Senior Ride Free. HHS, or?
Okay. I'm Sean Brennan with Montgomery County Department. There we go. Okay, Sean Brennan, Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. Really appreciate you looking at this topic, and I appreciate people coming out. We have social service providers. We have people who use the services. Appreciate you finding time on the cold day to come out. It's an important topic. So, of course, the Department of Health and Human Services is concerned about the health and well-being of all county residents and wanting to ensure their safety and their self-sufficiency, and transportation is a big part of that. In particular for older adults, as we've talked about it a number of times, isolation frankly kills. So as much as we can do to prevent people from staying home and allowing their physical and cognitive and social selves to shrink, we'll be better off. They'll be better off. So in terms of what our role is with mobility management and HHS, we're looking at promoting what's available. Certainly, we're out there cheerleading for the DOT programs and programs of JCA and other service providers, and doing what we can to expand programs and to improve them. So a couple of things. We do have a mobility management perspective, which I'll talk about a little bit, and then we have some efforts specifically targeted to volunteer transportation, escorted transportation, and older driver safety. So mobility management it's a really broad concept, and it's applied kind of differently depending on your setting. So a social service agency could have a mobility manager, for example, dealing just with the clients of their social service agency, and then here we have a county that's 500 square miles and 1 million people, 163,000 of whom are over 65. So, you have to kind of cater the approach to the environment that you're in. But in any case, mobility management definitely looks at the individual within the system, which actually is kind of a social work approach, right? You look at the person in the context that they are functioning. We do look at a family of transportation services. A mobility management approach does not assume there's going to be one solution. It encourages advocacy. It really embraces the notion that people who are using the services should be included aggressively. Their participation should be solicited, and what they say should be given serious consideration. That's a mobility management principle. And then, of course, we do a lot with promoting what's out there and trying to fill gaps. So some of the challenges, again, the fact that there is no one solution is a challenge. People wish there were, and I wish there were too. Transportation is really expensive, and this is a shock to both the individual who's having to put their hand in their pocket when they haven't traditionally had to do that for every ride, to people who are trying to fund big systems. It's shockingly expensive. And because of that, a lot of the people who provide transportation do have to impose eligibility criteria. They can't just be, completely inclusive of everyone who might want to use their service. And they have to charge. So these are just some realities that, as I talk to people in the public, you get resistance. They really don't want to have to pay. But that's just reality. Transportation costs. A lot of times public transportation isn't perceived to be safe, and that lack of sense of safety may be really a lack of familiarity, might be the bigger issue. We're a suburban county, and a lot of people are accustomed to their cars, and they're very comfortable with their cars. And as much as they might complain about the traffic, taking that step to using a taxi or a bus is a big deal, and they're not comfortable with it. So there's resistance to that. And then another issue is, of course, that our transportation environment is changing. And as we're trying to be more green and encourage non-vehicle ways of getting around, like bikes and scooters, those things cause some hazards that affect folks, in particular pedestrians. And so as we, for example, work to minimize risks that maybe bikers face, we may find that instead of eliminating a risk, we're actually transferring it to somebody else. For example, a person who does not see well and can't dodge a bike. So a couple other things with mobility management in HHS. We work really closely with DOT, JCA, other providers, JESA, Recreation Department. We're working to stay closely connected with the commissions on aging and people with disabilities so that we understand the needs of folks and encourage them to voice their concerns as needed. We have roughly quarterly meetings of a group called Getting All Around the County, and it's informal. It is a lingering element of a grant that started in HHS and went to JCA, and then now we're keeping it going. And so stakeholders come. It could be people who are using the services. It could be social service providers. Sometimes DOT staff come. JCA staff is almost always there. Senior Connection, volunteer transportation. It's open. It's informal, but we look at a variety of issues. We've looked at bus stop accessibility. We've looked at the Transportation Services Improvement Fund. We're going to be talking about dockless scooters coming up probably in December and how people are dealing with the challenges of that. I'm fortunate to be able to attend the Washington Council of Government meeting, Access for All, and there are some really interesting topics that come up there, people from around the region dealing with many of these same issues. So a couple of the things we've been talking about, getting the word out. What do we do to get the word out? And we have focused on creating a variety of materials that are easy to read, attractive, in different languages. This is overwhelming. I mean, just sitting here in the last hour or so, if people weren't familiar, it's a lot to take in. So, I mean, I've had intelligent people read some of our materials, in fact, what's in the packet, that 2-pager that says transportation options, and say, I still don't get it, what's for me? And I think it's just, there's so much. So the good news is we have Connect a Ride so people can get individual attention when they really do need to find some transportation solutions. They can talk about their unique needs with someone individually and get help navigating. But as you're putting information out to the general public, it's just hard. Okay, what do they need to know? If you know nothing, what's just kind of an introduction? Oh, the county has escorted transportation. I didn't know that. So just tell me where to go now. versus let me give you 4 paragraphs that describe the eligibility criteria, the hours, the pricing, the sliding scale, etc. So anyway, a lot of focus on trying to make information accessible and understandable to the population is what I do. With the volunteer transportation, this has been an exciting area of growth, particularly with the villages and as they have developed. But there are some other organizations too. Both the old granddaddy Senior Connection that's been there 20 plus years, providing volunteer transportation to folks throughout the whole county, to newer groups, and with these initiatives like that JCA has with the Village Rides, finding ways to provide infrastructure for small groups to start doing transportation and take away some of the barriers or making it easy for them. So we do in HHS have some county community grants with groups who are doing volunteer transportation, and certainly with the villages. So when you're supporting villages, 90% of the time you're supporting transportation too. So thank you for that. Volunteer drivers, they can be really difficult to recruit. They tend to be concerned about liability. Some people don't want to be on the roads in Montgomery County, so that is not attractive as an option for being a volunteer driver. We usually promote the idea that they can choose, the day that they do it, the time, that it's very flexible depending on their schedule. We play that up. We play up the fact that you get to develop relationships with people. You're kind of intimately near somebody, hanging out, and all kinds of stories come from that, and people like it. Once you've recruited someone, they tend to stick with it, but it is hard, and the more that we could do to organizations to say, hey, maybe we can help you with some of that secondary insurance, so that you can be reassuring your new recruits that something happens, you've got coverage, you're not liable. That could help. We are very fortunate to have an escorted transportation program. JCA is the contract monitor for us. They partner with Jewish social service agencies and other providers of escorted transportation. It is a sliding scale. It goes up to you can make up to $40,000. You can make more than call and ride. It's for any purpose, so it's not just medical. It was designed with the notion that people who are limited, they still need to get out, and they should have some good social opportunities, go to the library, etc. As it is, 80% of the trips are still for medical purposes. So that's just kind of the reality. Similar with volunteer transportation. Lastly, we do like our cars. And when we did a survey, an age-friendly survey of folks back in 2015, we found that of those who responded to the survey who were over the age of 80, 79% were still driving as their preferred method of getting around. So we do a lot of work with AARP, with AAA, with groups that are trying to keep people educated on being safe drivers and making changes as they need to, and how to deal with the transition away from driving. It's not a black and white issue. People make adjustments oftentimes. So a lot of work with that, and trying to educate social service providers about that transition and helping people deal with it. So that's, I think, what I got.
Can I just follow up on that point before we leave it?
Sure.
What services are available to people who are what services are available to people who are giving up on driving? And have we ever, and I'm not familiar with what AARP or any of the other nonprofits you mentioned are doing, and I'm wondering whether you've ever sought doesn't the MVA keep track of driver's licenses that are turned in?
Well, the MVA
done
has a
outreach.
medical review process. So when there's a situation where folks aren't sure if someone should keep driving, and they go through that process. I don't know what happens when they choose to suspend someone's license and what they do with that information over time. I haven't heard about that. One thing that's interesting is 85% of the time when someone goes through a medical review process, they keep their license. So they're definitely not about taking licenses from people, but they might put a restriction on the license, such as you have to drive during the day, or you can only drive in non-highway situations.
Do you know if it's possible to get a list from MBA of people who have recently surrendered their licenses so we could connect them with services about how to access a bus or ride-on.
My hunch is
Right,
what
or
they
anything
would
like that.
say is that they would talk to us about how to connect those individuals with resources, but they probably will not give us their names.
Okay.
Privacy issues, but we've talked about that, and I've made some inroads, but I haven't gone completely successful with, for example, having our information about transportation options
Right.
in NVA offices.
That was my next question. Like, they could just forward the information about services to people who are going through that process.
Yeah, gotta keep chipping away, but it's an excellent point.
So there is no one place where we've got all this information. And I know it's what we've got, and so the 2-pager, and I think, which is great. We've talked a little bit about a potential technology solution. I remember when Dan Hoffman was our Chief Innovation Officer, he was exploring the feasibility of having on DOT's website, and then eventually through an app. I'm buying a car right now, and so, they ask for the year, and then it takes you to what make, what model, and then how far do you want it from your home. I mean, there are mechanisms that we can utilize that articulate the type of transportation you're looking for, where you happen to live, and it won't be perfect, but at least it can help sort through some of the myriad of information that's available.
So
And-
there's something that the Council of Governments has invested in called Reach a Ride.
Right.
If you go to Reach a Ride, you can do some of what you're describing. I need transportation from this point to this point. I need a wheelchair, accessible vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work too good.
Yeah.
So you could get, for example, a list of 30 replies.
Right.
And so where do you start? Well, it's alphabetized.
Right.
So I'm starting with ALS Association. Like, I already know that's probably not going to meet my needs because I don't have ALS. So yes, it's the issue of doing it well.
Right.
That's a challenge. I don't think it's impossible, and maybe we have to say, well, what lessons could we learn from Reach a Ride
Right.
and then invest in something that doesn't have those pitfalls.
Right.
But garbage in, garbage out, things like that, you really have to keep current. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, if you're using multiple providers, private providers, and their world changes and they don't update, if people have a bad experience, they often don't give it another try. So it's just possible, but
Yeah.
not easy.
Right. Right. Okay. Hans had a point in the net. Yep.
I just think that this slide here underscores the urgency around not only senior transportation that is providing vehicle trips, but pedestrian improvements in general, because at some point, you're going to have to, we're all going to have to give up the car at some point, and at that point we become potentially taking public transportation or perhaps using escorted trips all the same, but this is the future, and this is why walkability is such a priority. We need to have housing in places that are walkable, and then we need to have a safe pedestrian environment so that people can do that. So I had never seen, I don't think, these crash statistics there. Those are striking. That's not good.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you for this. And this was just recently brought to my attention, just dropped off in advance of this conversation, Transportation Network Directory, which is exhaustive. Not necessarily user-friendly in the same respect that we're talking about digital technology, and I haven't gone to the website, montgomerycountymd.gov/TND. Is that any more user-friendly, or is that just a PDF listing of kind of this?
It's not just a PDF, so
Okay.
you could look down the menu, and a lot of the categories that are in the table of contents you can see. So, for example, it'll say volunteer transportation, escorted transportation, and you
The
click
table
on
of
it.
contents here. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it is absolutely exhaustive, and for those who are here in the room, definitely recommend picking up a paper copy, hard copy, or going online. It is a full comprehensive listing of information. We do need something more digital friendly, however that works, understanding the hiccups that you highlighted, understandably so. And the heart of the question I have for you, much like the question I had for DOT, which was about the use of the Transportation Services Improvement Fund, right, and utilizing that, having a vision for that. My question for you is, within DHHS and all of the grants and contracts and services that we help provide, is there an inventory of those organizations with vehicular fleets? Do we know who has shuttles, cars, whatever they might be, so that we can start thinking more holistically about integrating their services for when those fleets aren't in operation? Or if one organization, their bus broke down, and we just happen to know that another organization has a bus that might not be used at a particular point in time. Has that inventory been done?
I'm personally aware off the top of my head of a number of organizations. I don't have all of them. I know that when you dive in, so for example, yes, this organization has the vehicle, but will the driver be able to go to help meet the need? The driver who's familiar with that vehicle meet the need of another organization? How do you deal with the insurance? Who's paying the driver's time? What about the maintenance? How about the gas? So there, if there was money added to the infrastructure that you had available of the vehicles plus the people, that would help. So it's not just let's share, because sharing, there's more to it than that.
I understand the complexities in the utility of that information. Totally, and you highlighted that. I understand that. But I think as we move forward, recognizing the needs and the complexities of all this, again, I'll come back to the phrase I used before, having that baseline information is really important. And whether it is us, the departments themselves, or giving that information to the nonprofit sector, and utilizing an organization like Nonprofit Montgomery, of which many are probably members, and say, those of you working in the social services, particularly even senior services or disability services, this is what we know. This is a comprehensive listing of everything that's happening in the county, or at least the fleets that are here, and allow them in that quasi-private sector to have those conversations, to work them out. We don't have to be the middleman, but we are the keeper of a lot of this information, and we just haven't digested it as such. And I think that would be a very useful tool for our partners who are all here in the room.
I don't know if anyone from the Jewish community would want to speak up, but there was a time about 5 years ago when within the Jewish community, social service organizations, they were looking at this issue of, even within that sort of smaller subset of the population, could they work together on vehicles and transportation? And I don't recall anything coming of that. I don't know if anyone remembers. I do. That's in the realm of pitfalls. But
Okay. Well,
it's worth doing.
I come from the realm of try and try again, right? 5 years is a long time. Needs have changed. The population has increased. There's new blood in Rockville, right? And so, quite frankly, we can be a little more creative from our perspectives. And at the very least, the desire is there. I know that much. That's the communication that I've personally been receiving, which is why I asked for this conversation. So the more we can do to help the sector, I think the sector would ultimately benefit from.
Can I piggyback on that, if I could? There was a similar issue like this a few years ago when there was an effort from the executive branch to do a pilot for private school transportation. I don't know if folks in the room, some people will remember this. It didn't pan out because, for a number of reasons, mostly because it was going to cost the county a lot of money to be able to do this. But one of the things we tried to do was encourage the private schools essentially to pool their resources. The main problem was what Sean just mentioned, what had to do with liability. And one of the thoughts at the time was if there was some kind of county insurance fund, self-insurance fund, that could cover this kind of thing, which somehow get contributed to from the private entities, that might be a way to help one group be able to operate somebody else's bus. So again, I'm not sure if the potential is there, but it's probably worth exploring.
Reference to the previous
and I'll just
session.
note that the individual volunteer drivers, we could look at sort of a macro level look through an economies of scale. I know our Villages program has been very successful in the coordination in certain communities only, for example, in Bethesda, those are thriving. And they're doing fantastically because you've got this beautiful network of volunteers who end up not just establishing relationships with the riders, but the drivers themselves have developed these really strong social groups and are supporting each other in a variety of ways. So I do think it's worth looking at creative solutions like that moving forward, because the need's going to expand. I mean, we all know that. And so being able to be in the best possible position to absorb that, I think is going to be important. But thank you very, very much. And of course, we've got Seth here, and you've been listening contently and patiently to a lot of this conversation. Would love to hear from the Commission's perspective where you think some of the gaps and opportunities are, and from your guys' perspective, what do you see?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be quite as upbeat as everyone has been to this point, and I'm going to be very honest with our opinions here. I do thank the T&E and HHS committees for allowing us to weigh in, because the issues of the disability community and those of the aging community are very interrelated and very similar.
Yep.
I would point out that a third of the people at age 65 have an identifiable disability, and the proportion goes up from that point. So our interests are those of the aging community and vice versa. Transportation is critical for independence and autonomy of all people with disabilities, regardless of age.
Right.
The isolation caused by inaccessible or fear-provoking travel conditions are as critical a concern as the unavailability of the accessible travel itself. Unfortunately, I've got to say, I don't think the county is reaching the level which I would expect it to be at this juncture on all of those fronts. The Transportation Improvement Fund, which was rated for various other purposes over the years, and in part was there because it was not being used enough. And I worry about this proposal of using it for all these other projects, because I think we're losing sight of what it was put there for. It was put there because of the entry of the programs like Uber and Lyft, and the fact that they don't have accessible vehicles. And the surcharge was put on there specifically so that accessible vehicles were available if they were needed by an individual who wanted to get a taxi. And I've got to say, unfortunately, despite the fund, we are actually at a worse point at this point than we were when it was first created. And now we're talking about taking those funds and using it for other transportation purposes. I would point out that along with this Transportation Improvement Fund legislation, at the same time approximately, the law was put into place that all taxis in the county were to be accessible by the year 2025. Well, I don't see anything in DOT that is pushing that process, and certainly if people were having trouble accommodating that requirement, this would be a perfect fund to help them accommodate those issues. So why are we looking to separate more money out of the fund when, if anything, it's going to be barely enough to do much for the transition over to accessible vehicles? So I think that there is a big issue here. And, you know, that is just one point. The recent initiatives to squeeze bike lanes into an already overcongested and overbuilt roadway system has increased the risk to all pedestrians, and especially for the blind, the hearing impaired, and people with inability to mobility impairments. The rushed implementation of these projects almost assures that the need for subsequent expensive retrofitting to correct for the problems that have not been thoroughly thought through. And it would make sense, in my opinion, to put a moratorium on it while we still discuss the issues that are not resolved. I can tell you that we've had presentations and we've made recommendations to DOT. Quite frankly, I haven't seen much in the way of response or one way or the other. They come, they give a presentation, but they really don't answer why aren't they doing X, Y, or Z, which we have specifically recommended to them. And I think that this is a big problem. We're going to have more accidents, we're going to have fatalities, and I would point out that this type of development of floating bus stops and bike lanes in other jurisdictions internationally have resulted in suits and have caused jurisdictions to not pursue the issue. And I really worry that we're already recently on a Department of Justice fine, as it were, for not being compliant with our parking lots. And we had to pay fines for that because we were not accessible. We were not following the ADA. Well, I've got to tell you, these floating bus lanes bus stops are definitely not safe and accessible, and I think we may be facing more fines if we don't do something about it before we roll them out all over the place. Last night we had a meeting of our commission, and a good 25 minutes was taken up, 25 minutes to a half hour, just people highlighting their individual experiences, and this is around a table of maybe 30 people. So it's not isolated. I know people on the county council have had their own issues with it, and I think that we are really setting ourselves up for lawsuits. And I would like to see not just the lip service of coming to our commission and listening to us, but then never hearing anything back about what in fact has been taken in and what is being done, and not seeing changes at the floating bus stops. It sounds like to us that we are being heard but not heard. We make our statements and then we go and we see no changes in the bus stops or any of the recommendations that we have suggested to them. Lastly, the dockless scooter, and I'm sorry to be going so long. The randomly littered sidewalks of dockless scooters create a problem for people who are in wheelchairs, for people who are blind. I would like to see not just a pilot study, but perhaps you have to fine the companies for scooters that are left in inappropriate places. There should be an area, a general area where they should be allowed and left. But if they are causing blocking of the roadways, you could say, okay, if you don't put your scooter in a place that is a reasonable place, you'll get a fine and you will be billed. And as far as I'm concerned, the companies could split the difference between the two, between the county and the company if they have that issue with dockless scooters that are left in inappropriate places. But that should be part of the negotiation with these companies. Thank you.
Lots to react to there, and I appreciate that feedback. And I'd heard, unfortunately, a lot of it before, and I agree that there needs to be a greater sense of urgency. You had testified during our boards and commissions review that the painted green that is being used by bike lanes can't be seen by eye-seeing dogs because they're colorblind. So I do think we did, through the conversation of dockless scooters, bring the Department of Transportation in when we heard they were going to pilot the program to get more information on accessibility issues. Fines were discussed as part of their pilot project, and we're due to get an update at some point within a year of the implementation, which was this past April. But I have made my opinion on this issue known publicly. I get very frustrated as I'm walking along the sidewalk, and I myself and Councilmember Glass has actually done this as well, physically move them over to the side of the road so that they're not impeding walkways. And so there clearly does need to be a lot done. We've been focusing most of our time and attention on rideshare and ride and transportation opportunities, but the safety and security is obviously very much related to that, and so is walkability. We do have a new director of transportation, Mr. Conklin, who I've known for quite some time, and I'm hopeful is going to address these issues more readily and more directly moving forward. But what I think would be helpful is you clearly had a well-articulated list of concerns, and it would be helpful for us as both committees to receive that list and have the opportunity to follow up with DOT to get more direct responses. And I'm not sure if DOT is in a position now to be able to respond to some of those concerns, but we would be happy to, at a later date, also give you enough time to react more formally with responses.
We certainly will be glad to respond. It's just we need to work together to discuss the issue and then get back to you.
Absolutely.
The council president got a letter, I can't remember who it was from, I don't think it was from you, Dr. Morgan, it was one of your colleagues, making some of the same points, and a response from her to Mr. Conklin was he wanted to get the department's response and on these issues and get back to, I can't remember, sorry, I didn't remember the fellow's name, but him as well as to the county. Yes, Mr. Crawford. Yes, it was you. So they're working on it. Don't know what the answer is.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. On the dockless scooters, I do think we need to tackle the problem of the scooters being left in the sidewalks. And, some communities are exploring docking areas. I don't know what the answer is, but we've got to build a system that doesn't result in scooters being left in the sidewalks. I do believe it's attainable. I don't know what the answer is, but there's a lot of people who are working on this out there, and I think there's got to be a way to do it. So, my worry is I'm a big advocate of the scooters. I think they're a very important addition to our transportation system. But if we don't manage it properly, then it's not going to work, and we might find that we don't have them anymore. So we've got to devise solutions. On the bike infrastructure, it continues to be my understanding that our infrastructure is designed according to the most cutting-edge ADA standards. I understand you do not agree with that. That has been the response that I've received from DOT in the past. I'm always willing to sit and get a better understanding of that. But it has been my response to my inquiries about that are that they feel that this is the best practice from an ADA perspective. So I guess we just need to understand a little bit more the gap in perception about the value there. I do want to ask about the fund, the Transportation Services Fund, and I hear your point about this was intended to create wheelchair access vehicles and transportation options for people who can't use TNCs. We all know that the problem has been recently the fund has not been expended, it's been sitting there. So my suggestion that we allocate some of that to Seniors Ride On Free was not meant to be something that would be ongoing, but a good related use of the fund while we don't have other ways to spend it. What is DOT doing to try to get all of the existing taxi fleets to convert their fleets over time?
So what we've done is we did. Excuse me, Fred Lees.
No, not his first rodeo.
Forgot to push the button. What we've done is we've increased the incentives in the regulation to put money up front to try to reduce the barriers to actually purchasing the vehicles, so that we're giving $15,000 reimbursement right up front. This is any fleet, anyone who wants to buy an accessible vehicle. We're providing that incentive to reduce the barriers for purchasing, and then we're also increasing the supplements for operating these vehicles, increasing the amount that you get for each wheelchair vehicle ride that you pick up, making minimums there during the day and overnight, which is some of the toughest times. So we increase the amount for a minimum reimbursement that we would provide for an accessible trip overnight.
Are they aware that they have only 5 years until 100% of their vehicles?
They are very aware of this, yes.
Do you think we're on track to meet the requirements of the law?
We are not as far along as we would hope to be.
Well, it might be worth a focused discussion on that sometime in the next couple months to just see what other measures are necessary.
Okay.
What do the companies cite as the reasons that they hold back on purchasing more vehicles?
I have heard many companies say they can't get drivers for the vehicles.
Aren't they substituting one vehicle for another vehicle?
That is correct, but again, these vehicles are more expensive to operate, which is why we try to offset that with a per mile offset plus an offset for the insurance that goes along with them. So we're trying to incrementally increase the incentives to get this done.
Drivers who are typically independent contractors.
That is correct.
They are not volunteering to drive these, with the exception of that co-op fleet and perhaps a few others.
Correct.
Dr. Morgan, do you think there are things that companies need to be doing to incentivize?
Well, I think, because you have to take into account that the drivers are independent contractors, and they are looking at it at a pure monetary point.
Right.
And they tend to be also rather wary of governmental intervention with, programs. So, because they have to file all sorts of papers, and then the issue is, not wanting to be on the radar, as it were. I think that what has to happen is that perhaps the fund could directly reimburse a company, which in turn has been told it cannot charge as much to its driver, and thereby allow the driver to use the cars that are accessible with less of a financial burden, because you're right, it's more expensive to run it. Frankly, even with the pickup and drop-off supplements, it's not enough for many of them to want to do it. It's just a headache because they have to go through all the paperwork. Maybe just let them use the vehicles and, have the companies reimbursed by the fund.
It's not out of the question. I mean, ultimately, this is probably going to have to be mostly a public service. It's a niche of riders that the market may not provide a solution. It just may not. So we have to have a model that is sustainable and that can meet the need.
Well, then expand the program that is for accessible people, which is, I think, up to 4 cars at this point. I mean, if we gave them more money, maybe they'd be able to provide more services and more drivers through the Anytime Cab program.
They say they would.
Yeah.
Right.
Perhaps a strategic plan to achieve our goal here. I mean, there's got to be a directive. How do we get to there, rather than waiting for the private sector to come forward with the solution? How do we take charge and make sure that it happens?
Again, we have been focusing on incentivizing, and we've increased the incentives.
Just not, there are bigger forces at play.
That are bigger forces at play.
So could we ask for a plan that would actually get to the goal? That's a very vaguely worded request. Do you understand what I'm asking for?
Yes, I do understand, and I think we can get back to you with some concepts or some ideas on how we think we can get to this point. Okay. Sure.
Councilmember Glass.
How does that have to go?
Great points. I mean, again, that's why we're here, to figure out where the deficiencies are and what we need to do, whatever pressure we need to push to make sure all of this works. And Dr. Morgan, we didn't talk about this as you and I, before this hearing, came from the Metro and walked over from the Rockville Metro together. So while you're talking about taxi services, I want everyone to know that you are a full-fledged Metro rider, and you and I walked over here together. So I
use it for all of my meetings. The times that I've actually used a taxi, probably you could count on one hand in the last 6 months.
Well, and I appreciate you being candid about that, because the sincere nature of your request is obvious, that you don't utilize these services despite using a cane, right? And I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
The aspects of your comments regarding the floating bus zones, and as Chair Albernaz noted correctly from the previous hearing that the HHS committee had, the green painting, which is now ubiquitous, the fact that seeing eye dogs are colorblind to it. It was fascinating when you shared that with me at that hearing a few weeks ago. And I'll let everybody know that next Tuesday, the full council is having a hearing on Vision Zero, where this will, in some form or fashion, be brought up again, if not by me, by somebody else, because it's an important component on it, and letting our colleagues at DOT a glimpse into some of the questions that may be asked, right? A cheat sheet, if you will, and we'll have that conversation. So if that's interested, if folks are interested in that, stay tuned next Tuesday afternoon in the room right behind us. Switching gears, the one question I have, diving into some of the data, there was a point that intrigued me. 11.1% of county residents living with disabilities are unemployed, compared to 3.5% of the general population. And so my open-ended question is, how much do you think that is attributable to transportation problems?
I think a lot of it is, and I would point out that our county, although we've been proactive in employment in various, the county itself can't hire everybody, obviously. But as a county, we are higher than the national average on people with disabilities being unemployed. We're talking about people who want to be employed and cannot find a job. I would like to see more collaboration. As I say, the county itself can't hire everybody, but programs that incentivize private employers to be willing to take on people with disabilities. And I don't have an answer for what that is, so don't ask me how to do that. But I'd like to see more of a incentive for employers to be willing to bring on people with disabilities.
Great. Well, thank you for that. It was a striking data point that I wanted to address. So thank you.
We have another presentation.
Great.
There we go. Adrian Clutter, Division Chief with Recreation. Happy to be here. We're here in transportation for Recreation Department remains one of our biggest barriers. And we see that with our older adults, 55 plus. We're open to all varieties of transportation. We want people to get to us. We know that recreation is a solution to some of our most pressing community issues. And sometimes we're overlooked for that. We heard from Sean about social isolation. Social isolation kills. And we're the cheapest preventive medicine that's out there, and we need folks to be able to get to that. And for us, it's a social equity issue as well. We know that quality of life and access to resources go hand in hand. And I think it's by 2034 that for the first time in the nation's history, we'll have more older adults than children, and we need to be prepared for that. And currently, 20% of our folks who we've sampled in focus conversations are getting to us by our partners, our JCA bus transportation. Although we're promoting any means possible. We talked to folks, I talked to somebody from University of Maryland just the other day who said she was ordering Uber for her father who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado. So we see folks using Uber and Lyft and a number of riders getting dropped off. I would say that the least amount of ridership of the folks that we surveyed were taxis. And so that was interesting. Some of the concerns were mentioned earlier with public transportation, the perceived safety issues. I think one of the things we're so grateful to our partners, the care and compassion which the JCA bus drivers support our participants, some who may struggle with mobility issues to get from their door even to the bus. And so we know that walking to the bus stop for some of our participants is not an option. And this conversation makes me think back to the council's day when they commuted to work with public transportation and just how they expressed some of those barriers as well. And then I think about some of our older residents trying to get to the bus stops and you know, I sat down with a resident recently and was mapping out the most closest bus route to her home, and it was considerably far, and she was a participant at our Mid-County Community Center. And so we know that it's going to remains one of our greatest struggles, and it's going to continue to grow. And I want to add that the recreation centers are where social capital is really built for our community. We're important. And I think just earlier this week, Congressman Raskins had a big event. 750 seniors came through Holiday Park Senior Center. And the Department of Transportation was out there promoting transportation with their bus and just trying to make sure that we can educate our participants on all the services that the county offers. It's a great service to live in, a great county to live in, great services. I think that we're using, right about now, we have a little bit, we have about 2,000 riders per month that we average with our JCA bus. And 85 riders out of that month are persons who use wheelchairs. And I think that's important to note because, again, that's where the barriers to somebody being able to access an Uber or Lyft, they can't get in, they can't get into the car. They can't, and certainly the driver's not going to the door to help them as well. And, as we continue to develop our programs and services, I think that we need to make sure that when we are adding opportunities that we need to add access for folks to be able to get to recreation services. I do know that the sports industry every year puts out data on people who are actively engaged. We had some discussion earlier with Department of Transportation about income levels, and I would like to mention that folks who are in households of $50,000 or less are considerably less inactive than others. And as we know, our seniors are living on fixed incomes. I think that that's important to note. I think that that number is going to continue to grow. We're seeing that our older Gen Xers are becoming more inactive, and soon they're going to be right there at age 55. So that's something that's important to note, that the affordability of transportation is definitely a concern for us as we move forward. And I'm not sure if Robin wants to add anything to that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Adrian. The only thing that I would add to that, over the last few years, we have a great collaborative approach with DOT and HHS, and I think Sean talked about it briefly. One thing that I've learned over the last few years in dealing on this topic especially, it is very much a social connection, but a case management. There is no one solution for so many seniors. Everybody has a different story, a pet at home, a doctor's appointment at a certain time, too far from the bus stop. So it really is almost case management. And so it really makes it challenging to try to fit all the needs. But I think we've really worked collaboratively with JCA and our partners to really do the most robust that we can with the resources we have. And I grew up in a small county north of Baltimore, and I can tell you this is really amazing because we have nothing like this in my hometown. So we should be really proud and celebrate that we do have some great resources as well. Thanks.
So I'm a little familiar with the program, and it is awesome on a lot of different levels. And I do think that it took a while for us to figure out the rhythm of it, and I think we have figured out the rhythm of it through those partnerships, through that collaboration, through that case management. And you both gave excellent presentations. I do think moving forward, there's an opportunity for us to think about whether it's feasible to expand the network of stops that would potentially include libraries, potentially include local supermarkets that are within very close proximity to our senior centers, and to really sort of maximize, because as I recall in talking to some of the seniors who were accessing the program, they said, this is great, but we'd love to be able to utilize this service to get to other locations within these small social networks as well, which I think could be helpful. So I think moving forward, a long-term vision to see if that's feasible or to see what that would look like, I think could be really helpful because the infrastructure's there and we've tested this out. We sort of know what works and what doesn't work and could be very powerful.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, from what we've spoken to seniors, the mini trip program is the piece that they miss the most.
Yes.
Which is, to your point, the grocery store, the
Right.
fresh market, the libraries. So I think as we do move forward to Adrian's point, that as we add programs and add elements, we need to look at adding accessibility too. As you know, we went through some
Right.
tough times, and
Right.
the best we could with the resources.
Absolutely. The other thing that I'll note, just that I've observed, is within certain cultural and ethnic communities, there's this really strong network that's been established. I'm thinking of the CASA, the Chinese American Senior Services Association, and somehow they get a couple of hundred seniors consistently to and from. And so I do think that there's models that we can look at that have been successful within certain communities that we may want to tap into. But as things improve economically, and I'm optimistic they will, this is an investment that I'm personally very interested in looking at making.
I think one thing that we should consider too, the number of senior housing that's being built now, and some of the housing don't have the recreation services there.
Yeah.
Some do.
Right.
So expanding to stops that can get large groups of seniors, to places where they can make social connections. And just one interesting thing on that, because it's really important. I just got back from teaching for NC State University, and talking about the power of social connection. And one of the research points that they mentioned is even for a group of Harvard students, the number one thing that determines success of a Harvard student, more than even IQ alone, was their social connections. So those who had greater social connections. So I think about our seniors, and I think about the opportunity, to be able to get out, to make those connections, and if we're not fortunate enough to be able to define ourselves by what we do for our work, most people are defining themselves by what they do in their leisure time.
Right.
And that's important to know. And we have to be able to help people do that. And again, it's what makes our community attractive and which keeps our seniors wanting to live here, because we have those services and offerings for them.
Councilmember Glass.
I profess not having as intimate a knowledge on this as my colleague. So the transportation survey, really interesting. I would love to dive deeper into that, because seeing the patterns and how people are utilizing our services, your services, there's a lot that we can do there. And so I would love to have a follow-up, even us, diving into some of that stuff. And then the one point I just want to kind of circle back to, which has been a constant theme that I've been saying this afternoon, is I would like the Department of Recreation to be mindful, as you're expanding these transportation services, all of which are important and necessary, to be mindful of what DOT is doing, to be mindful of what our nonprofit partners are doing. Because if we're going to move forward and using the resources that we have, as finite as they are becoming, we just need to be coordinated. And so, and if I could, I'll turn that into a question that you can also answer. You mentioned JCA. The chair alluded to CCAC, and there's tremendous work that community is doing. Are there any other providers which you use transportation services for, or any other partnerships?
Not currently.
Okay.
In the senior population,
Yeah.
I would point to the
Fair
fact
point.
that our youth
Okay.
development team
Yeah.
has been really pretty connected in that area, and partnering with the city of Gaithersburg, Street Outreach, Identity, and others to leverage their resources in terms of transportation for youth, and we need to do that as well for seniors.
I will add to something that we really haven't mentioned are that there are other DOT services, like getting to the grocery store and things like that, that we don't talk about enough, but our folks are taking advantage of, and that's important. And I think as we all know, it's not going to be a one size fits all. We're going to need as many options as possible, but I think the more we're open.
One organic thing I'll just note to that point is a lot of our group homes bring their clients with disabilities to our recreation centers without a defined program oftentimes, just coming because it's warm and there are activities there, and there's, as we have fewer malls, that this is the social capital. You're absolutely right about that. So I think, was there anything else? No. So there's definitely some stuff we've got to follow up on, and we really appreciate everybody's presentations. This is obviously going to be an ongoing conversation, but clearly we've got a strong foundation from which to work from, and a lot of work has happened, and this has been really helpful. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all.